She was young, beautiful, and deeply in love. He was powerful, feared, and hiding a deadly secret. Their wedding was a spectacle, lavish, extravagant, the kind of event that filled magazine pages. A fairy tale union between a billionaire crime boss and the woman he swore to protect. But just days after saying, "I do," everything changed. Their honeymoon was supposed to be a dream, a private island, crystal-clear waters, no distractions from the outside world. But for her, it became a prison. The man she thought she knew had rules. Unspoken, unwritten, yet absolute. And one mistake, one seemingly harmless curiosity, sealed her fate. A Mafia lord's wife made one fatal error. She uncovered the truth about his empire, and never lived to tell the tale. But what he didn't know was that karma was watching. In the days that followed, whispers spread through the underworld. His men grew uneasy. His enemies watched closely. And then, one by one, the cracks began to show. What should have been the happiest time of their lives became something else entirely. Because while he believed he had buried the truth, there was one thing he never saw coming. How did a romantic getaway turn into a nightmare? And how did the past come back to haunt the ruthless crime boss? Stay with me, because this story takes a dark and unexpected turn. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an amber glow over the Mediterranean, Isabella wandered through the villa's grand halls, her fingers tracing the cool marble walls. The estate was breathtaking, opulent chandeliers, Renaissance paintings, and hand-carved furniture. It was a home fit for royalty, yet something about it felt wrong. The staff was eerily obedient, their movements precise and rehearsed. The security detail never left their posts, their cold, calculating eyes scanning every inch of the property. But what unsettled her most was Alessandro himself. The man who had whispered sweet promises to her under the moonlight now carried an edge, his jaw tense, his phone calls cryptic, his late-night disappearances unexplained. One evening, curiosity got the best of her. Alessandro had left the estate without a word, and Isabella, unable to sleep, wandered toward his private study. The heavy wooden door was slightly ajar. A single desk lamp cast a dim glow over scattered documents and a locked leather briefcase. Heart-pounding, she took a step inside. Her eyes fell on a small, blood-stained envelope sitting atop a stack of papers. The seal was broken. She hesitated before pulling out the letter inside, the words sending a chill down her spine. "The shipment is late. If it doesn't arrive, I'll assume you've betrayed me. You know what that means, Moretti. No one escapes the Pact." The Pact. Her mind raced. Alessandro had always been secretive about his business, but she had assumed it was just high-stakes investments, maybe even some shady deals. But this? This was something else entirely. A noise in the hallway made her snap upright. Footsteps. Steady, deliberate. Her hands trembled as she shoved the letter back into the envelope and stepped away from the desk, but it was too late. Alessandro stood in the doorway, his dark eyes locked onto hers. His face was unreadable, but the air in the room thickened with tension. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "You shouldn't be in here, Isabella," he said, his voice smooth but edged with something dangerous. I couldn't sleep," she stammered, forcing a smile. "I was just—" Before she could finish, he reached for the envelope, inspecting it briefly before setting it aside. Then, with a slow, measured step, he closed the distance between them. His fingers brushed her cheek, gentle, but there was an unmistakable weight behind the gesture. "You're my wife," he murmured, tilting her chin up so she had no choice but to meet his gaze. "Which means you never have to worry about what happens in this house. All you need to do is trust me." His lips pressed against her forehead, but the moment was far from affectionate. It was a warning. That night, Isabella lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The man beside her was no longer just the charming, ambitious businessman she had fallen for. He was something else. Something terrifying. The next morning, Alessandro announced that they were taking a drive along the Sicilian coast. A chance to relax, he claimed. To let go of the tension. But as they left the estate, Isabella noticed something strange. The security convoy was tighter than before. The air was thick with unspoken danger. And then, it happened. A black SUV sped toward them from the opposite direction. Tires screeched. Gunfire erupted. Alessandro shoved Isabella down as bullets shattered the windshield. The world exploded into chaos. Her husband, the man she thought she knew, pulled a pistol from his coat and returned fire with chilling precision. The convoy retaliated, but the attackers were relentless. Isabella's ears rang as Alessandro pushed her toward the floor of the car, his voice sharp with urgency. "Stay down!" But she couldn't just stay down. Peering through the shattered glass, she saw a masked man emerge from the other vehicle, gripping an assault rifle. And then, she saw something else. A tattoo on his wrist. The same symbol that had been on the blood-stained letter. Whoever they weren't random attackers. They were after Alessandro. And suddenly, she realized, this wasn't just a honeymoon. This was a battlefield. And she was caught in the middle of a war she didn't understand. The night air was thick with the scent of damp earth and distant rain. Isabella's heart pounded in her chest, her pulse deafening in her ears as the guards dragged her toward the estate's back courtyard. The Rottweilers, muscular and trained to obey only Alessandro's command, prowled restlessly in their enclosure, their glowing eyes fixed on her. She fought, her limbs thrashing against their grip, but the men holding her were unyielding. Alessandro followed behind, his polished shoes clicking softly against the cobblestones. His expression remained impassive, unreadable, as though she were nothing more than a regrettable inconvenience. "Please," she gasped. "Alessandro, I swear, I won't say a word. Just let me go." He didn't respond. Instead, he signaled to the guards. The iron gate to the Rottweiler pen creaked open. One of the men yanked Isabella forward, forcing her to her knees. Her breathing came in ragged bursts, tears blurring her vision. The dogs growled low in their throats, their instincts recognizing fear, anticipation crackling in the air. Alessandro crouched in front of her, his fingers lifting her chin so she had no choice but to look into his eyes. "You were never supposed to be here, Isabella," he murmured. "You were a loose end from the moment you stepped into my world." She shook her head frantically, choking on her sobs. "I didn't mean to find it. I didn't mean to." His thumb pressed lightly against her lips, silencing her. "I believe you," he said softly. "But that doesn't change anything." With a nod, he stepped back. The guards released her. The dogs tensed, ready. Then, gunfire. A single, sharp shot rang through the night. One of the guards staggered back, crimson blooming across his chest before he collapsed. Chaos erupted. The other guards spun, drawing their weapons. More gunfire followed, coming from beyond the walls of the estate. In the confusion, Isabella scrambled to her feet. A figure moved in the shadows beyond the courtyard, their face obscured, their weapon precise and deadly. The remaining guard fell, a clean shot to the temple. Alessandro's head snapped toward the intruder, his jaw tightening. "Who the hell?" Before he could react, the stranger grabbed Isabella's wrist, yanking her toward the open gate. "Move." She didn't hesitate. Adrenaline surged through her as she ran, her rescuer keeping a firm grip on her arm. Alessandro's furious shouts echoed behind them, his men scrambling to regroup. A sleek, black car was waiting just outside the estate's perimeter. The stranger shoved Isabella inside before sliding into the driver's seat. The tires screeched as they sped off, gunfire pelting the rear windshield. Isabella clutched the dashboard, her breath coming in frantic gasps. "Who are you?" she demanded, turning to face her savior. The man glanced at her briefly, his face illuminated by the dim glow of the dashboard lights. A familiar face. "Your best friend called me before the line went dead," he said. "Told me you were in trouble." Isabella's eyes widened in shock. "Luca!" "Yeah," he muttered, accelerating. "And we're not safe yet." Behind them, another set of headlights appeared in the distance. Alessandro wasn't letting her go that easily. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Alessandro Moretti had always been careful, ruthless, and untouchable. He built his empire with blood and fear, ensuring loyalty through both reward and terror. But he had never considered that betrayal could come from within. His brother, Lorenzo Moretti, had always been the quiet one. The peacemaker. The diplomat who smoothed over conflicts. Alessandro saw him as weak, but useful, a man who kept the family's business running smoothly while Alessandro dealt with the bloodshed. But Lorenzo had his own ambitions. He had spent years watching Alessandro rule with an iron fist, eliminating anyone who questioned him. The truth about Isabella had been his breaking point. Lorenzo had been in love with Isabella. A forbidden love. He never acted on it, but he saw the way she suffered, the fear in her eyes, the bruises she tried to hide. When she vanished, he convinced himself she had escaped. It was easier than facing the truth. But now, hearing Alessandro gloat about her death, something inside him snapped. That night, Lorenzo made a decision. A silent alliance. Isabella's cousin had been careful, but Lorenzo had been watching him. He recognized the look in his eyes, the quiet patience of a man planning something deadly. Lorenzo didn't know his name, but he knew his purpose. So, he approached him. "Walk with me," Lorenzo said one night after a meeting. The young man hesitated, then followed. "I know who you are," Lorenzo murmured as they strolled along the Moretti estate. "And I know why you're here." The recruit tensed, his fingers inching toward his weapon. "If I wanted you dead, I would have told Alessandro already," Lorenzo continued. "But I didn't. Because I want him gone just as much as you do." The recruit said nothing, his eyes searching Lorenzo's face for deception. "Alessandro killed Isabella," Lorenzo whispered. "And I helped him cover it up. That is my sin. But I can help you make it right." Silence stretched between them. Then, the recruit nodded. The setup. They moved carefully, methodically. The recruit had already planted the hidden recorder, gathering Alessandro's own words as evidence. But they needed something more. They needed the books. Alessandro was careful with his illegal transactions, keeping the evidence locked away in a safe only he could open. But Lorenzo had spent years at his side, watching, learning. The combination. The location. The backup copies. He knew them all. On the night of the Moretti family's annual gala, Lorenzo made his move. He slipped into Alessandro's office, heart pounding as he turned the dial on the safe. 3 left. 2 right. 1 back. The lock clicked open. Inside, stacks of documents, flash drives, and bank records detailed years of bribery, drug deals, and murder for hire. Everything the authorities needed to dismantle the Moretti empire. Lorenzo took everything. The fall of a king. At exactly 2 a.m., the ambitious prosecutor received an anonymous package. A USB drive. A single note. "Use this. Take him down." By morning, the police had surrounded Alessandro's estate. The betrayal was swift and ruthless. His own men turned on him, cutting deals to save themselves. The prosecutor had everything he needed: financial records, wiretapped conversations, and most damning of all, Alessandro's own voice, laughing about Isabella's murder. Alessandro fought, of course. He always did. But even the most powerful crime lords fall when the walls close in. As they dragged him away in handcuffs, Alessandro locked eyes with Lorenzo. "You," he hissed. Lorenzo didn't flinch. "You should have treated Isabella better," he said simply. And with that, the reign of Alessandro Moretti ended. But the story wasn't over yet. Because power never disappears. It just changes hands. And now, Lorenzo held the throne. Alessandro thought he had it all figured out. A criminal mastermind, running his empire from the shadows, untouchable by law and feared by all. But as the years went by, the cracks in his world began to show. His old friends turned enemies, and alliances that seemed unbreakable shattered. Once, he ruled the streets with an iron fist, but now, he was just a broken man, surrounded by betrayal on all sides. The evidence that linked him to Isabella's death was irrefutable. Her screams, her desperate struggle for life, all led back to him. The blood on his hands was undeniable, and no amount of money or power could hide that. In prison, Alessandro's arrogance crumbled. The walls that once seemed like his protection became his prison, and the inmates, once his loyal followers, now saw him as a mere shadow of the terror he once was. He could no longer intimidate anyone. Even the guards were indifferent to his threats. His empire had fallen. And then came the night that would end it all. Alessandro was found lifeless, his body cold, his eyes staring into nothingness. No one saw it coming. No one could explain how or why. Was it a final act of karma? Or had someone inside the prison finally exacted their revenge? The authorities never figured it out. Some whispered that it was a rival inmate, someone with a vendetta that had been brewing for years. Others believed it was a deep sense of poetic justice, karma finally catching up to a man who thought he could escape his past. But one thing was certain: Alessandro's reign was over. In the end, it wasn't the law or his enemies that brought him down. It was the weight of his own guilt, his own demons, that consumed him. The very thing he spent his life trying to avoid was what ultimately destroyed him. So, what's the lesson in all this? Isabella's story may have ended in tragedy, but Alessandro's story ended in a dark, lonely silence. Power, fear, and wealth couldn't save him from the consequences of his actions. There was no escape from the truth. And that truth will always rise to the surface. If you want more cases like this, unsolved mysteries, dark secrets, and twisted fates, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned. I've got more chilling stories coming your way. Now, I want to hear your thoughts. Was Alessandro's death a fitting end? Karma? Or something darker still? Drop your comments below, and let's talk about it. And remember, there's always more beneath the surface. So, keep watching, keep questioning, and never forget, the truth is always out there, waiting to be uncovered. See you in the next story.